Thrash metal hails here from Finland. You might wonder what this is all about. Well, this time I'm about to tell you about movie, or actually two of them, and each about thrash metal. Thrash metal from the west coast of United States of America, and in particular we're talking about some Bay Area thrash. That is areas like San Francisco and Oakland, and of course a little bit Los Angeles and all that stuff. Now I might as well just put it on the background to give you a little bit of the idea what's going on. And I recently got this email about this documentary movie called Bay Area Godfathers, about this thrash metal scene that took part of there, especially in the 1980s. Now recently I think this was released as more email coming to me, and they all kind of like review this, review that, and blah blah blah, because there was this Bay Area Godfathers Part 2. And that really got me interested, because it's when my eyes just zoomed into this image, which you should be able to see here, is that I was like, okay, it says Metallica, check, Testament, check, Exodus, check, Megadeth, double or half a check, and this Y and T. And I'm like, okay, so I like thrash metal, and my favorite kind of thrash metal is in fact the American type, especially when we're talking about the big four, minus Megadeth maybe. I never got too much into it, but that's not the point here. The point is that American thrash metal from the 1980s is really, really right up my alley. So, and of course, when that thing was really, really big, well, I was a small boy. I didn't know jack shit about anything, even less than nowadays. And while I started to like those bands, it wasn't, back in the 1980s, not the early years anyway, but actually more about 1990s when I started to find these bands and really, really got hooked into this stuff. And I'm still finding, new bands. Some of them are older, some of them are newer, but still, this is a scene that intrigues me quite a lot. Now, the thing here is, obviously, from, my experience with the style and the history of this whole Bay Area thrash metal scene, it's really, really quite different from people who were right there, on the West Coast, on the Bay Area, or surrounding cities and scene, because of course when you were living in Finland, you really don't get to see these bands growing up closely. Actually, when I think I heard Metallica for the first time, they were really quite big already. It's not like I was hearing like Kill 'Em All when it came out fresh and all that stuff. Not to mention these other bands. They were virtually unknown back in the days. Of course, if you were already adult and following metal scene very closely, like early 80s, that is if you were like basically born in early 60s or so, maybe then you had the chance to see and hear about these bands fresh. But for people in my age category, and I'm like mid-70s born guy, now, all these bands were already quite big when you get to hear them and read about them and maybe get to see some of them in Finland. Metallica visited Finland quite early on, but it's not like we got these bands just like that in big waves and all back in the 1980s. So I kind of came late to the party, much like nowadays generation is quite late to the 1990s black metal party. But that's how it is. And, the funny thing is, good albums never grow old. But in order to know more than just the albums and the lyrics and, now quite old members of the band, you really have to go to the roots. And if you really can't invent or borrow some friend's time machine, what else there is to it, really, but to read about it, hear about it, or maybe take a movie and watch a story about it. And that's where Bay Area Godfathers Part 1 and 2 come to be. They open your eyes to the story of these Bay Area bands especially the bands that were operating in San Francisco area, but also, like I said, there are parts of Los Angeles. Now, when you see bands like these mentioned here, especially bigger names with Metallica and stuff, that is kind of like, okay, now something really big is happening, and you're kind of waiting for the stories of these guys to be heard. And to a certain degree, this documentary just delivers what you're expecting. You have Lars Ulrich, for example. You have a couple of guys from Exodus to the talking, and so forth. You have some more famous name dropping lines and going down to the memory lane, having, a little bit reminiscing about like, okay, we were drinking beer and we were going to these clubs and blah, blah, blah. But you also get to hear lots of record label guys or peer guys or people just around the scene. Some of them are journalists or were journalists at the time. Some of them had other important parts of the history. It might be a radio DJ, or it might have been some promoter of a club or whatever. And they all have different stories to tell, which is then again quite interesting. But, and there are a couple of major buts in this kind of documentary. So let's get to the positive sides at first. Now, the positive thing is that if you go through both of these documentaries, which are roughly about 80-90 minutes per movie, so in essence you almost like what's about 3 hours of material around the stuff. You get a lot of talking heads, which is cool if you like talking heads. If you then again like something else like footage from the old eras, it's not gonna be that much a fantastic trip for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's not too much of that. And secondly, whenever there is this old footage from, live gigs or whatever, I mean, the image quality isn't that good. Now, then again, maybe you don't even mind. I certainly don't really mind that quality because, I know that it's not like people had too many video cameras back in the days and were just literally, shooting everything on video like nowadays people with, smartphones and all that stuff. So it was very, very different from that era, and of course that's the reason why so much talking heads are being used here. Now, that is the second problem. A lot of these talking heads are not that good quality. It's clear that some of these, maybe due to COVID, I don't know, are done with like, okay, you please do your own video at your home with whatever is at your disposal, be it a webcam or whatever, and just, reply to me over the Zoom or Google Meets or Skype or whatever. So the quality is very, very different. Some are top-notch, at least image-wise, and some are quite bad. Even worse it gets when we're talking about the audio quality. I've gotten my share of bad luck and bad equipment sometimes, or equipment malfunction. If you've seen any of my interviews, you know that there's a big difference between the really good ones and the bad ones. Sometimes maybe a mic dies during an interview, and then I just go with this really, really horrible audio quality. And that's almost what happens here with some of these interview parts. It's not horrible, but it's definitely not even decent quality. But even that is totally okay to a certain degree. Once a person has some interesting things to say, you don't really care if the quality isn't that bad or good or whatever. But the other thing is, there are lots of talking heads repeating the same stuff that what the guy before him or her said. And also because a bunch of these people seem like nobodies. They are not nobodies as such, but it's not like you have the whole Metallica crew talking about the 80s. It's not like you have the whole Testament line up there. It's not like you have most guys from Exodus or Megadeth or, I don't know, even Y&T talk about. There are lots of people, for example, who I had no idea who they are, even when the name just like goes to the screen saying like, this is this and that person, because without this background that I'm like able to put my finger on and say, okay, this person is that, who did this over there, and so forth. It's like, okay, I don't know why these people are here. Some of them tell good stories. Some of them are just filling the gaps. So I'm very, very much divided about this whole documentary thing here. I mean, on the other hand, I kind of liked it because it really opened my eyes to a lot of different phases and different places and stuff like that. But then again, it was already something that everybody knows. So you had these gigs, you had these places, you had these venues and blah, blah, blah. Duh, of course there you had these venues, and of course some of them are now closed or have been for a very long time. So it's like they're repeating stuff that you could pretty much guess before they even say about it. And then there are these kind of reminiscent parts which are kind of sympathetic, you know, in a way, like, yeah, I remember when I was drinking with those guys and blah blah. It's more like it's fun to go down the memory lane and have those talks over beer or whatever, but they don't necessarily make a good movie. So what I'm trying to say here is that while I kind of sympathize with the intention of this movie and the message it's going to deliver, and while some parts are really interesting, you know, opening the background a little bit further and showing these different names and places and all that stuff, there's a lot of stuff that, well, it's not necessary to have. It's like as if this documentary lacked the interesting people and had to use whatever was at disposal. And there are even a lot of people who are being filmed but who don't really necessarily say anything, or say so very little that it doesn't even matter if they are there or wouldn't be there. So I'm kind of on the verge of saying this is mediocre, but at the same time this is kind of interesting. So I don't know if it's more about lacking the possibility to interview right people, if you will, or if it's just about putting together whatever you have at your disposal and hope people will like it, hope that people will pick it up and just yay. For me, it was kind of interesting to learn lots of names which seem like totally has-been names now, or names that never made it over here. I mean, names that I didn't even know of. And now that I could go on Metal Archives and start browsing, maybe I could find a lot of interesting bands. So in this respect, this documentary does quite a big favor to so many bands that are not big, that were just left there dead and forgotten. But at the same time, unless you really know the scene before you start watching the documentary, it can raise more questions than give you those answers. So once again, I'm on the verge here. You know, I'm on the fence whether or not this is actually a good documentary or just bad. So my verdict would be, it's decent. It's decent, especially if you have a soft spot for Bay Area thrash. If you want to know more and you're keen to hear these new names and see these people who you didn't even know about, if you're open to learn these, well, events, the parts of history and all that stuff, this could be really, really an interesting thing. But at the same time, if you're looking for some kind of a household names, you should be looking for those celebrities that you look up to as your idols. If you want to look beyond Lars Ulrich and some other names who are talking here, you're gonna get disappointed. There are not so many famous names dropping you those, you know, memories or parts about history, and you can just feel like, okay, I got a little bit of full time here. So I don't know. This is kind of a hard cookie to crack. You know, some people might really, really find this really good, but in my opinion, well, it could have been so much better. Now, the second part, The Godfathers Part 2, is definitely more interesting than the first part, but I still would say more editing would have been necessary. More, well, better quality overall would have been very nice thing to have, and there should have been more screen time for the more experienced people, the ones who really came from nothing and became really big. Not only Metallica, but for example, for Megadeth, there is David Ellefson. I mean, yeah, a long time member, but still it feels like a little bit, I don't know, empty. And as such, I don't know, it could have been so much better, to be honest about it. But still, no regrets watching this documentary. I had a rather good time having a couple of beers and watching these 2 episodes. So definitely, if you're a maniac, if you're a diehard fan of that genre or scene, you should watch these. But if not, it's not anything mandatory in order to enjoy your Bay Area thrash metal. Take it as you will, but now at least you know about it. It's open for rental and various places. I think at least Amazon and Apple TV and some other places you can just pay per view, and you can at least take a look at the trailer to figure out whether or not this is gonna be right up your alley. This is my final verdict. Decent, but not good. Thanks for watching. Looking forward for your comments. Bye bye.